So I'm the chair of the music department, director of a World of Music concert series. We're delighted to have you here to talk about music from Tin Pan Alley. And before you chat and before you play, I'm going to ask my colleague Sudil to say a little bit. And as she comes up, I'm going to ask all of you please to turn off your cell phones so that we don't have other kinds of music interfering with this music.
Other music.
Yes, we don't want.
Mine has a little jazzy piano.
Well, that's okay.
Set it on Alstyne.
Yay!
Thank you. Very kind. Okay, so what is Tin Pan Alley? Anybody know? No? It's a couple of things.
New York City, a lot of piano noise, sound like clanking pans.
Hey, the guy.
Yeah, well, there are a couple of different theories about how the name came about. Some say it's because of panhandlers who would have a tin pan, and they would shake coins in it, and they would be begging for handouts, right? The other thing is that there were so many pianos going on at the time that might have just sounded like, cacophonous thing. But it is a district in New York City. Several years ago, it was people were going to tear it down, and then it was rescued by a group of people who got together and said, "We can't. This is a historic treasure for us." So anyway, so in order to understand a little bit about what's happening in the era that Tomi's going to be lecturing about, I'm going to give you a little history. Okay, so we're talking about the 19th century, and this is the big, huge thing that happened socially in the 19th century was what? The Industrial Revolution, right? And that had a huge effect on this instrument, right? Because prior to 1820, as my colleague has just informed me, because I wasn't sure of the dates, these soundboards were made of wood. And there's so much tension on these strings, they didn't hold up very well. And in Beethoven's early career, and other pianists also, they would write these pieces that were supposed to be grand, or maybe they were a concerto with an orchestra and they had to play it loudly. The piano would break in the middle of the performance, and they would have one more in the back, and they would take that one out and bring another one in. But after the Industrial Revolution, and or during it, and these metal frames were built. So then that ushered in the age of the piano. And there were hundreds of piano manufacturers in the United States. And pianos didn't cost too much. I mean, you could afford one if you were middle class, and many people had them in their homes. Some of them were really good, some of them weren't, but you could have a piano and you could learn to play it. So then this whole industry sprang up around pianos. So if you think about this country in the 1800s, this is still a young country, right? So what were the things that had to be put in place in order for this to happen? You had to have an ability to print the music, distribute it, right? You had to have the ability to manufacture the pianos and distribute them. So all this, the railroads were instrumental in this too. So all these things were kind of coming together at the same time. Then, and then the music, if you think about it, at that time, the music was all live. It was all live. And so lots of towns had little bands. They had town band, and they would play with them. Have like bad marches and stuff like that. And then, okay, so that's that. And then about the time of the Civil War, when the piano was getting really, really more into more and more people's homes, the sheet music industry sprang up. And there was, around wars, there is always a lot of music, a lot of songs written about wars. And so the Tin Pan Alley developed as this music publishing district, and so the composers and arrangers and the songwriters and all the, everything centered around New York, and then it was, things were distributed. It was really the center. I brought some things to show you. Just my grandmother was a singer, so I have some of her things. But I just want to show you a few covers. Now, all the covers were decorated, by artists. And so, Oh, What a Pal Was Mary. My father used to sing little bits of it. He thought it was funny. I don't remember the song. And then Roses, a more serious cover. Right? Pack up your troubles in your old kit bag and smile, smile, smile. You know this one. When is it from?
World War I.
Yeah. Exactly. It says, what is best described as a philosophy song is now being sung by the troops as they march along. We believe it will become overwhelmingly popular in my merry Oldsmobile. Away with me, Lucille, in our merry Oldsmobile. And I don't know the rest of the words to that, but there they are. And singing around the piano, right? So, and then we have, look for the silver lining whenever clouds appear in the sky. But anyway, so all these songs were popular in this time, the early 1900s. But it all started during the Civil War. That is when the sheet music industry really took off. And so this is a book that, so that I'll show you a couple more pictures. But I got interested in American music when I was in college, and my professor actually put this compilation together of songs from the Civil War. And there are all kinds of songs. There are marching songs and, songs about children being stranded by the war. And we're tenting tonight on the old town ground. All these kinds of songs from the war. Sad ones, happy ones, longing, Anyway, so great fodder for the publishing industry in New York at that time. One of the things about the music was it had to be I'm going to tell you two more things. It had to be accessible, right? So some of the arrangements were pretty simple. There was a lot of basic chords and some melody, but a lot of the left hand. Now, Tomi's going to dress this up for us and play more virtuosic arrangements of these. But the other thing to remember about these songs is that they are songs. They have words. And there's one sheet that's here, I don't know if you all got it or not, that I made up. It's called, it has smiles written at the top of it. And if you don't have one, there are a couple of URLs on there, and you can listen to some periods recordings of this music. A lot of the music from popular songs, was based in musicals, or operettas. Okay, so they are songs. So that's something that I don't want right now. But I think we're good to go, Tomi.
Okay.
I'd like to take it from here.
Thank you.
You're welcome. I hope it was instructive.
Oh, it was
Was fabulous.
things I never thought of. The Industrial Revolution. Okay, so the first thing is I want to thank Susan Dill and Carmen Peralta for having me here tonight. Very much, in fact. So, Tin Pan Alley. I was going to talk about Tin Pan Alley, but I don't really have to. She mentioned that pianos became much more common. And in fact, the years that I'm talking about, which is basically 1900 to 1922 specifically, those are the years when I believe most pianos were made in this country ever, and when most houses had, well, not most houses had piano, but the most houses ever that had a piano in that time, like my mother had twice. So, back in those days, all the composers of these songs played piano. Some better, some worse. Many of them were very, very good. And as she said, if you wanted to hear music, although now in these years that I'm talking about, they had recordings. But basically, if you wanted to hear music, it was basically live most of the time. And you go to your local tavern or cabaret, or you play piano at home and have a home musicale. You might hear a record player someplace, you might own one, but most music was live in vaudeville theaters. And if you don't know what vaudeville is, Google it later. It was very important for all this. Every common band in any town of any size was centered around the piano. So the big question for me is, why aren't there any recordings at the time of solo piano? Given that it was the basic instrument to be heard. If you were going to hear popular music, piano was included. All the composers wrote from piano. Tin Pan Alley was full of pianos all the time, but nobody ever made a recording of a solo piano playing pop. So I don't know why, but I'm here to show you how it might have gone. Now, during this time, there were three big influences, and one big influence is where I draw the line. That's the last one, which I will mention at the end. The first big influence was ragtime, which started, the first printed pieces were printed somewhere in the middle, early 1890s. But it had been going on for a long time before that, improvised always. So, the second very powerful thing in those times, and this was also very old to start with, was the blues. And as far as Tin Pan Alley goes, the influence became basically the introduction of blues notes and inflections into songs written and performed. Blues notes, if you don't know, are between the piano keys. But as a singer does it, it kind of wails somewhere in between the two notes. That state of affairs continued until the first blues vocal record was introduced in 1920. After that, you started having more obvious blues references in popular songs, but they were still there before that. And I have one in my head that's from 1910 that has not only blues, but boogie woogie, which is just impossible. You can't have boogie woogie, but never mind. The third major influence in this time is the introduction of jazz, which nobody knew about until roughly 1915, 1916. The first acknowledged jazz record was made in 1917 by a band called the Original Dixieland Jazz Band. And that might have been actually to begin with the Jazz Band, spelled with either two S's or one S, or sometimes they spell it with one Z or two Z's. They didn't really know what to make of this. The general public didn't really know, except it sounded wild. And they loved it. So after that, this was done by the band members not having written arrangements. They made it all up in their heads. They knew where their instruments should be, and they just played along willy-nilly. So, the final thing that made a big difference, and I'm not going to get into this unless I have time, is swing time, which is uneven eighths notes. The first eighth lasts longer than the second eighth in two pairs. And nobody really knows where that came from, but it became basically the default in about 1923, which is why I stopped this whole show in 1922. So, I don't know that I need to say anymore. Let's just get started. Oh, I will say one. The first two songs on here, the Yama Yama Man and Naughty Naughty Naughty, are two sides of the same of the coin of ragtime or not ragtime. The Yama Yama Man is an out-and-out ragtime song, and Naughty Naughty is a very straight song There is no syncopation, no ragtime in it. I will put ragtime in it, but the song itself doesn't have it. And we'll see what else I have to say. So,
Are you playing this one after the other, or cassette, are you playing this one thing, or?
oh no, I'll, it's going to be finished. But all of these songs fell into a form that became the normal form during this time period. And they all start with the short introductory piece called the verse, and then the main body of the thing called the chorus. Now, within those two parts, there are various kinds of forms which I don't have time to get into, but well, I will mention it in the next, not the next song, but the one after that. Anyway, so here's Naughty, 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 which is a very cute, coy, flirtatious song, as opposed to the title, which is just naughty. these sort of, the way I'm playing them sort of reflects the way the composer, everything I do here is going to reflect the way the composer mostly thought of it. Now that one I injected a lot of ragtime, but the composer did not intend there to be ragtime in it. But I did it because it's in the spirit of the times. Now this next song, also the other thing is, as the songs get more recent, 100 years old instead of 115, they get more and more jumpy, lively, and I'll be doing a lot more notes on them. So watch out for that. This next song is by the world's greatest songwriter ever, named Irving Berlin, and I stand by that and I'll fight about it. And this song is from his first Broadway show in 1914. I've never heard a recording of it. I've never heard a piano roll of it. But it's great. And it's a very unusual form in that none of the parts repeats throughout. It's called a through composed or an ABCD. And not too many Tin Pan Alley songwriters were writing those. So.
Can you talk about the stride bass?
Oh, stride bass. Well, stride, you see my left hand jumping around here. That is a standard sound on piano rolls. I got a lot of my inspiration and ideas on filigree and filling things in and counterpoint from piano rolls because there's no other way.
Do you know a piano roll song?
Oh, a piano roll is a mechanical piano that basically has a computer program, but it's in the form of a roll of paper. And it goes over a vacuum-packed bar, and air is sucked in, and it's got little holes in it. And every time the air is sucked in, a note sounds. And they were popular from roughly 1901, 315, I'm not sure. But they were heard until late into the 30s, I believe, and there's still some people out there, and there's some out there, and people are still making rolls for them of like Madonna hits and Lady Gaga hits. So it's a pretty interesting thing to hear. I don't know if they do any rap on them. So that's piano roll. Now then, where else was I? Good enough. So, as we go along, things are going to get more notier. And this is not too early to start. So, show us how to do the foxtrot. stride piano. Now, stride piano is the left hand jumping around from a bass note to a chord. Some people would say that stride is not a word to be used in the 20s or the early 20s, only in the late 20s and into the 30s. I don't see that myself. I call it all stride. It has to do with adding swing rhythm to it in the late 20s when people started calling it stride.
It's
But
also called jump bass.
I've never heard that, but it sounds
Okay.
good to me. A lot of these terms,
Yeah, good.
like jazz, like swing time, like stride, are very vague. They may mean this, they may mean that. Some people agree, some don't. I've heard people talk about how stride is only reaching tenths in the bass and only moving the left hand 2 octaves from down here to up here. And, or using only the pinky for the bass note, moving 2 octaves. It's a little too much gatekeeping for me, so I don't pay too much attention to that. But still, people can't tell you what jazz is really. So anyway, here we go, 1915. You just heard this little, which I injected into it. It's not in the music, but this next song was written by a very interesting guy called Louis Hirsch, I guess, who wrote mostly for a very big name Broadway producer of the time, whose name was Florence Ziegfeld. And he was one of a stable of normal, regular writers that Ziegfeld would call on. And he wrote a ton of stuff. And most of it is not all that great, but this one was one of his biggest hits, and it commemorates the first transcontinental telephone hookup. Big deal, right? There it was. It was a big deal. Hello, Frisco. Hello. two slower songs, I have to point out that almost all of these are pretty up-tempo, and some of them are going to get a little frantic. And that's basically my taste. I know a lot of slower stuff, and that's one of the slower ones I'm going to play tonight. It's not even romantic. Gee. It's just about, well, it is actually. You know, it's, oh, I miss you so much, I miss you so much, but we're a continent apart. But thank God there's a telephone. So, this next one, Smiles.
Yeah, and I said one thing, I'm sorry to interrupt you again. On this sheet that I passed out are the words to the next two songs. So if you feel like following along.
Sing along, eh? Right up my
Do you
alley.
want us to sing?
If
No.
you know it.
I know. And I
Okay.
also put URLs on there of people singing these in the period, their live recordings from the 19 whatever it is.
Do you have any more copies?
Yes?
So, this song was a genuine huge hit at the time, and it's still very well known among people who like this kind of thing. I've known it for a very long time, because if you go out looking for old sheet music, it's almost always somewhere in the pile. So, Smiles, beautiful, lovely song. This song has a particularly wonderful, strong, sweeping melody, which I can't say about some of the other songs. They're all good melodies, I'm very picky about that, but this one has a particularly graceful melody. And the other thing about all this is that I'm sometimes playing a little short intro, and sometimes I'm not. And that's kind of up to me. So, don't ask for an intro all the time. This one does have an intro. I'm so glad you're all here. Okay, now we come to another big name song. This one was recorded as late as the 60s by none other than Aretha Franklin, if you know who she is or was. She was like a big deal in soul music in the 50s. Still is a big deal even though she's gone. But this was of a genre called the Southern, the Dixie, and also the Mammy song, of which there were just tons and tons, all about, I can't wait to get back to the South. I can't wait to get back to Alabama. Jeez, what am I doing up in Connecticut? I should be in Alabama with my mammy. And it's just like, give me a break. But there were just tons of these. And intermixed with them were songs about trains going to Dixie. So there's Alabama Bound and things like that. Most of these people had never been south of maybe Pennsylvania or something. But they kept writing these. So, and this one is no different, but this one is like a challenge for a lot of singers. It's very dramatic, and what can I say? Al Jolson, Google him.
I put the link on here.
Ah,
And one thing that, again, I'll just reiterate what you said about vaudeville. These songs, the format of these performances, because they were all live, vaudeville acts had a lot of things in them. They had singers, they had dancers, they had skits, they had dog acts, they had bird acts, they had all kinds of different variety of things. And the music was one of them. If you listen to this Jolson recording, he talks after it, and listen to these. Help you understand more about this era.
yeah, also, as far as Jolson and various other kinds of performers like him, which were very dramatic, the last part of these songs were often slowed down to a grinding, pounding beat, so he could really put across the message with no subtlety at all. It's really powerful stuff. And I'll be doing that in this song. It's just like vaudeville. That's why I play this stuff, because I want to see vaudeville. down on one knee. Punching his chest. Okay. Another inimitable Irving Berlin song. This is also one of which there is no contemporaneous recording. I've heard a piano roll, but I can't get to it anymore. But to me, it's really among the very finest of his songs. And it's about Prohibition in 1919. You can't get liquor anymore. How are you going to dance? You can't shimmy on tea. So it's a problem, but he wrote a good song to shimmy to. Plain old time. The other thing I should mention here is that at least 50%, if not 70 some odd percent of what I'm playing is all improvised. It's all off the top of my head at the moment.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about that a little bit. This is the form that you're doing, is you're repeating the refrains or the whole thing. The first time it's stated, this is similar to what's jazz thing. The first time is you play it straight, more or less, so you can hear the melody. Then the next time, the melody is hidden, and there's a different, it's like a theme and variation, okay?
Yeah, and the other interesting thing that I'm doing that most people don't do is I'm improvising on the verses too, which is not something that most jazz players play. And in fact, I don't call myself a jazz player. None of what you're hearing here is jazz.
No.
This is pop music improvised on. Because jazz, you gotta be hip. And I'm not hip.
Can you talk a little bit, one thing that didn't get covered was this, what happened in 1923?
Oh, right. Well, I did say that. What happened?
Can you explain it a little bit more?
Okay. Well, swing time, unequal eighths. What you're hearing mostly here is very square, boxy rhythms. But swing time, it would sound like this. Got that? Does that make sense? You hear that? So in order to apply that even better, there was a song called In the Mood. It was a big hit for big bands, swing bands, and it sounded like this in 1938. What it would have sounded like in 1907 would be this. That's it. I mean, it's basically giving more time to the first eighth note of any two. So you have 4 eighth notes, so it's 1 is longer and 3 is longer, 2 and 4 are shorter. And it varies with the tempo of the music. It's not something you can notate. But it became more or less the standard in 1923, and that's why I'm stopping there. Because I don't think swing matters that much. And in fact, it doesn't really matter that much now. But ragtime is still with us in every form, all the time. You can't even hear it anymore. It's become so common, but it's always there. Even just the tiniest little bit of anticipatory push is because ragtime started in whenever it was, 1894. So that's why I stopped.
Thank you, Tomi.
All am I done?
Then one of the things, one of the questions on the question sheet for those of you who got it is, where would you go to hear this music? And Tomi did mention saloons and bars and places like that, but there were also dance halls at this time. And this music is danceable, so people would go and dance in these dance halls. Yeah.
Do I have?
Oh, you don't have the question sheet. It's for the students. Do you want one? Okay.
Do I have time to finish this?
Do you have time to do what?
Finish.
Anything you want.
Oh, I thought I had finish time.
Huh?
I thought I had end time.
Well,
there.
we have 20 minutes left.
Oh, good. Here
What
we
are you
go.
going to play?
Oh, 5 minutes, 4, 5?
4 or 5? Oh, that wasn't the... Are there more in the back? Yes. On the back? Okay. Sorry.
All right, let's go on. We reached 1920. I don't want to leave this one out. This next song is called Palesteena, and it was written by a couple of big name songwriters of the time. You can Google them, they wrote everything. So it also falls into a rather strange genre, which is kind of almost Yiddish foxtrot, because the main melody came from an old klezmer song. And for you fans of certain 1960s rock and roll guitarists, there's some fun in here for you.
bother me, and then you do. Thank you.
All right, another great Irving Berlin song from his first, this is from a show he put on in his own theater. He built his own theater, the only Broadway composer ever to build his own theater. He owned it outright. Amazing. This is a rhythmically complicated song, so hold on. It's Hoschna. songs. You got time on earth for that?
Sure.
All right. The next one has no date on it. It's 1921. And it's a Mammy song. This is prime time for I can't wait to see my Mammy. Why did I ever leave? Oh, I roamed. Roaming was very bad because you should stay near your Mammy. The title, Weep No More My Mammy, actually comes as a quote from Stephen Foster, Old Folks at Home. And this was a common thing for songwriters to do, is to quote other songs, going back as far as Stephen Foster, going older than that. They quote each other, they would quote themselves, and in this case it's Stephen Foster. So there's a little quote in here, but it's a little subtle, and if you don't know the song, you're not going to catch it, but who cares? So we come to 1922, the end of our journey here. During this time period, sometime around 1916 or something, there emerged a song called the Oriental Foxtrot. Now, Foxtrot, you've been hearing Foxtrots all this time. But for some reason, songwriters started getting fascinated with Arabia, Persia, Japan, and these are all called Oriental Foxtrots, even though it might actually be about Hawaii, or it might be about Africa, or basically any place but the US and Europe. It might be about South America. But they were called Oriental Foxtrots. And the interesting thing about Oriental Foxtrots is that somehow or other it seemed to give a little goad to some of the songwriters to do something unusual. And the most unusual song forms I've found in this period were all Oriental Foxtrots. But this is not unusual in form. This is standard form, written by a guy whose name is Onivas, which is Savino, Domenico Savino, his pen name. He was like a big behind-the-scenes music guy in Tin Pan Alley, Broadway, and Hollywood. But occasionally wrote a wonderful song like this one. Burning Sand, so I guess it's Sahara Desert, Gobi Desert, I'm not sure. is Atta Baby, which is kind of rip snorter. Some of these names are big names. Some of these names are very well known among aficionados. Others are not. And Halsey Moore and Will Tracy are a couple of lower down on the lists of well-known great composers. But this is a great song. So, this is it. I forget how I started. Oh, no intro. Here we go. I'm supposed to answer questions here. Anybody take notes?
Yes.
Oh, ho, ho! All right.
There's a lot of ones. But you, I don't have questions. So you play pedal a lot. Is that your style, or is that part of your right foot is?
Frankly, since there are no solo piano recordings, I don't know. It's my style for sure.
Okay.
But I thought I actually toned it down a bit here. When I'm at home, I kind of tend to note things together. But then this is on risers, so it's easier to not hit the pedal too
Can't hear you.
hard. Huh?
Can't hear you.
Oh. He asked if I...
Stand
He asked if... What was the question?
I just said, it looks like you use the pedal a lot. Is that?
Yeah, there are some
personal
people...
style, or is that something that's part of that?
There are people who claim that none of this stuff should be played with pedal. But I'm not one of those. They're the same kind of people who insist that stride piano has to be 2 octaves apart and played with a pinky, that kind of thing. But it should be dry to a degree. I agree with that. But I thought I held it pretty well in check. You know, it wasn't melting, I don't think. Was it?
Perfect to me.
Well,
I don't know anything about it.
There you go, an expert.
Well, if I could, can I address that a little bit?
Sure.
When you're playing piano, there are places where it works the pedal and there are places where it doesn't. If you're playing chords, then you can pedal if it's the same chord. When you change chord, you pretty much want to change the pedal, right? Because then it'll blur and not sound as, depending on what you're doing, of course, but also, when he's playing a lot of these runs and ornaments, then you don't want to pedal those because again, they'll get too blurred. So when the places where you need clarity, pedals off, and then where you want to sustain that bass maybe, then you put the pedal down and keep it on.
I tend to use the pedal more, of course, in these slower ones. And you may have noticed that I really held it down at the end of the Palesteena when I just like the noise. You know. That reminds me of Vladimir Horowitz. So the other thing that you may have noticed, and I should have said something, this is not subtle music. This does not call for interpretation per se. It does not call for sighs and whispers and gasps and thunderous this and that. It's pretty out in front. It does not call for subtlety much. And in fact, if you start injecting too much subtlety, I think that's wrong. A lot of it was meant for dancing too, so got to keep that beat steady. The one couple of things where I slowed down, it was like for a stage singer, Al Jolson, to get down on one knee and proclaim his love for his Mammy. Very dramatic point. Otherwise, it's basically dance music.
I noticed on your information that you were a pupil of the daughter of Liszt.
No, not a daughter of Liszt. No, a daughter of a student of Liszt.
Student of Liszt was, in the Romantic period, is one of the most emotionally charged music that's ever composed. How do you approach with that skill? How do you approach?
That was so long. Yeah, no, that was so long ago that I just put it there because it's the truth. That's who I took lessons from. But it really has not much at all to do with what I'm playing.
Do you use any of the skills that you learned in terms of phrasing in your ragtime playing?
Well, you're assuming.
My question is, how do you approach phrasing when it comes to ragtime?
When it comes to this, I pay attention to what's written on the sheet music and what the singer should be doing. So I try to put some sort of, also it's easy when you're playing piano to just run on and run on without a break. And I try very hard not to do that. I mean, you can hear jazz pianists who will just run on for way past any normal singer's breath. And they'll play a whole chorus with running notes in it. And it's like, yeah, that's good, but even the listener needs to take a breath occasionally. But no, that was so long ago. I mean, look at, I ended with her when I was 16. That's some 50 years ago. 60 years ago, now that I think of it. So, I took piano in college. I took harpsichord. That's where I really learned about how to study this stuff, was learning harpsichord. But phrasing, I've been listening to pop music all my life. I've been listening to rock and roll. I've been listening to older jazz. I've been listening to the creamy, smooth sounds of the 50s singers. Not Frank Sinatra, I can't stand, but and they all bring something that is instructive about how to make things work in terms of proportion and startings and endings. the rest of it, the making stuff up, that's just me. I don't get that from anybody in particular. So, does that answer the question?
Sure.
I mean, phrasing for me is like, it's breathing. It's not something I think a lot about. Although, I mean, you can see that I would start some of these things fairly easy and then get notier and louder and faster on some of them. But that's kind of also standard for this kind of music is to keep it down until the last chorus, then really hit them in the last chorus. That's kind of vaudeville, Broadway vaudeville tradition. So that's what I do.
Yeah, I was just curious, how many of these pieces have you heard a original solo recording from just a piano?
None.
None of them?
No, that was one of my points here. There were no solo piano recordings being made in those times of pop songs.
Didn't you say though that some people had piano rolls? Or
Yes,
other okay.
but I thought you meant live.
Well, I did, but now so what ways have you heard the original pieces be played by the composers?
I haven't.
Just the sheet music and
Just the sheet music and recordings of bands and singers at the time,
yeah.
and piano rolls. That's basically it. And I look at the words and I see what kind of melody it is, how fast the chords change, what the sentiment of the words is, how the melody fits with those or doesn't fit with them. I make up my mind how to play it from that. I think I'm taking the composer's original emotions or intentions and using those correctly. But a lot of these people were also kind of cynical. They'd make up, this heart-tugging, beautiful song and then say, "Oh, what a piece of crap." That happened a lot. In fact, Irving Berlin did a lot of that. So no recordings of piano in that time. So my imagination is that I'm the guy you'd hear if you walked into your neighborhood saloon in 1915. I'd be the piano player, and this is what you'd hear. Although perhaps a little louder than they would play in a bar. I've played in bars, and I know you can't really get away with playing too loud.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.